Yo, what's up, guys? What's up? I've got a really exciting duel for you here. James is facing off against this guy, Carl. I don't know who he is. I've never played against him before, but Carl challenged James to a $20 money match in the Edison format. I'm going to narrate this game. I'm not going to be able to see either player's hands. I'm not going to be interfering. I'm not going to be in chat with James during this thing because this is a game with real stakes. Right off the bat, Carl doesn't have an extra deck, which leads me to believe that he's either on Gladiator Beasts or some, like, Machina. That's weird. Even with Machina, you normally want the full suite of Chimera Tech, Fortress Dragon, and Stardust Dragon. In the case that you, uh, in the case that you play Starlight Road. So having 4 extra deck cards is lazy deck building. And it's sort of given me this feeling that James is going to destroy this guy. I don't think this is going to be a very close match. Mostly because I've never seen this guy play before, and we play this format like pretty regularly. A Doom Caliber Knight here is interesting. I don't love it out of the Machina deck. We've talked about it in the past. It looks here as though Carl is expecting the Dupe Frog. But nonetheless, there's not much they can do. The Machina Fortress is going to attack over the Dupe Frog. The Doom Caliber is going to... Ooh. No? That's a misplay. I feel like you'd want to trade the Doom Caliber for the Dupe Frog. Because now, if James can put another Dupe Frog into play, the Machina deck is going to suffer. And they're going to have to spend a card on the Dupe Frog that they normally wouldn't have. Already, Carl off to a pretty poor start here. Making some not so great errors, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah, exactly. Here, Carl didn't have to spend the Smashing Ground. Carl could have saved the Smashing Ground, could have attacked over with the Machina Fortress. That's just like a pretty big mistake. Hopefully it doesn't cause the shift of this game too much. I wonder what James' set is here. It's probably another Dupe Frog, if I'm going to be honest. Oh, it could be a Substitoad. I wonder if James would set something like Flip Flop Frog here to try and put the Machina Fortress back into Carl's hand. Yeah, it's looking like it's probably a Flip Flop Frog. Either that or James is thinking about using a Battle Fader or thinking about using Gores. This Carl player, again, never really seen this guy play before. I think they play goats. They're probably pretty good at goats. Just because at the pace that they're playing tells me that they're familiar with the game. Would be really nice to have something like a Cyber Dragon on this board. James really does like to take his time, and I think that that's a good thing. I think when you're in stakes games or tournament games, really thinking through your plays, making sure you've considered your options, there's no issue with taking an extra 20 seconds to make sure what you're doing is what you want to be doing. I think that's a hallmark of a stronger player, especially in tournament settings and especially in stake settings like this is. I wonder what else the gadget player has here. Turns out it is the Flip-Flop Frog. Returning the red gadget. This is probably to alleviate some life point pressure. Interesting decision. Maybe James has a way to acquire this Machina Fortress, perhaps a Soul Exchange or an enemy controller of sorts. I don't agree with this play. Attaching the gear frame to the Machina Fortress, you would only ever want to do this in formats with Dark Hole or like Smashing Ground. On this board here, you're just, especially against frogs, you're just opening yourself up to get 2-for-1 by like a Brain Control or something. This is a really, really poor play, in my opinion. So I wonder how much this is really gonna cost, these few like play errors. I wonder how much these are gonna cost the Carl player. I wonder if saving that smashing is gonna make a difference. If I'm gonna be completely frank, I do believe James is on fish. I don't think James would play a stakes match without bringing what he assumes to be the deck that crushes newer players in the format or weaker players in the format, and that would be fish. But I also don't know if James was on the Frog Monarch deck. This would be a pretty good start for him. You normally don't see Flip Flop Frog and Frog Monarch though. That's normally more of a heavier Frog Engine decks like the Diva Salvage decks or the Fish decks like to play. Flip Flop Frog is an interesting card. It gives you outs to stuff like Titanial, Vanity's Fiend, lots of other cards that might give you issues. Note that Flip Flop Frog doesn't target. You select based on the number of frogs you have face up at the card's resolution. So in order for that to happen, you can't target on activation, because if your opponent chains something like Compulsory or whatever, it will affect how many monsters you can return with Flip Flop Frog. I really have issues saying that. James reveals the Oyster Meister, and naturally, we now know he's on fish, as we had assumed before. This Pot of Avarice looks like a Desperation Pot of Avarice. James probably has a bad hand, if I'm going to be honest. Pot of Avarice, again, when we talked about the fish deck in the best decks of the format video, it is one of those cards you can activate more frequently in this deck than you can in perhaps the plant deck because of Substitute and Swap Frog being able to get those 5 monsters in the graveyard turn 1, turn 2 very, very easily. You're going to be hard-pressed to do that in a lot of other decks. Pot of Avarice is going to be a better mid to late game card in other decks, but in these types of decks, it can be straight up a Pot of Greed, which is pretty good. James is in the tank here, probably has a few more options to consider now that they've got 2 more cards. Carl, probably getting a little impatient, as I would be if I was playing against James here. I'm just kidding. I don't know if James has the same effect on other duelists, or if other duelists are more patient than yours truly. Anyway, if you guys like this type of commentary, if you guys like this type of video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our channel out. Ooh, James is using his extra normal summon on a Unifrog. Nasty move, nasty move. This Unifrog is going to be able to pick off either the Machina Gear Frame or the back row. Carl, unfamiliar with the format, clearly doesn't understand that Swap Frog gives an extra normal summon of a frog monster. But, nonetheless, Carl's having a little bit of issues understanding. It's understandable. Swap Frog has a lot of effects. If you're unfamiliar with the format, if you're unfamiliar with the cards, how they work, it will trip you up a little bit. You'll need to take a few minutes. But yeah, leave a like, leave a comment, leave a subscription to our channel. We're really trying to grow this format, grow the game, grow the community. And I think that the few people who have joined the Discord or started playing with us since then, actually, I've had a great time playing with these newer players, and they've been really awesome people. So we're getting a bit of a community started. And if you guys want to be a part of that, feel free to join the Discord. The link will be in the description of the video. And check out our channel, you know. Get a feel for what's happening here in 2021. Carl definitely having some issues understanding the rulings. As you can see, the watchers are declining. Noticing that Carl's having a little bit of, oops, accidentally resized. Zoomed in on the Swap Frog there. Let's see. But yeah, Carl's having a little bit of difficulty, and a lot of people are going to get bored of this. This is quite difficult to watch. I might need to message Carl and be like, hey, you're on video. This is how this effect works, if you're concerned. Yep, and here we go. Moving on with the game. Let's see. Reading Unifrog, probably responded to the summon. Thinking about a Torrential Tribute, I wonder if Machina Gear Frame protects. Yep, there we go, we see it. Machina Gear Frame being attached to the Fortress is probably a sign that Torrential Tribute was the set card. Which makes me wonder if James really wanted to do that there. Probably still a good play. Although you could return the Swap Frog first, assuming you have another water to special summon it in case the summon resolves. I don't know. That's just something to consider. This is probably death for James if he goes for it. Yeah. So despite those few like little errors here and there, looks like Carl probably going to be able to pick up game one. I don't think James has the Battle Fader, or else they wouldn't have returned Red Gadget earlier in the set. Yep, going into game two, James is probably going to be bringing in Cyber Dragons, and I feel as though we can expect to see the Doom Calibers leaving Carl's deck. We're probably also going to see maybe Dimensional Fissure. I'm trying to think what else this Gadget deck has to combat the Fish deck. It's not much, if I'm going to be honest. It's probably something like Dimensional Fissure and maybe some other interactive cards such as DD Crow. Something to try to deal with the grave element of the Fish deck. The decks like Gadgets and decks that don't really use their graveyard, they can afford to maybe play those types of cards, but they also have a significant weakness to decks that can manipulate the graveyard. I don't know. I haven't really seen the Machina deck enough in action in recent history to know exactly what Carl's going to be doing. I'm interested to see what really happens here. Another thing I was thinking about is in game one, perhaps he left the Doom Caliber in play to stunt an effect on James' turn. Stunt an effect like a Swap Frog or a Substitute. But even then, why would you use the Smashing when you could just attack over it with Fortress? A strange play, indeed. Maybe it's because he wanted to summon the Red Gadget in main one. Interesting line. I would not have chosen that line myself. I would have traded straight up for the Dupe Frog because placing another Dupe Frog in play is such a bad position for the Gadget deck, if I'm going to be honest. It's not ideal. I believe the Gadget deck probably has some number of Royal Oppression. I wonder if they're on Dark Bribe, maybe? Something to protect the Floodgates. We could see a Rivalry of Warlords out of the Gadget deck, or a Gozen match. There's quite a few of those types of effects that we cover in our sideboard video that the Gadget deck can play pretty effectively. Even Fossil Dyna is a scary little inclusion from the Gadget deck. Moray of Greed, one of the strongest cards of the fish archetype. Not archetype, but the fish strategy. It allows you to shuffle back cards like Metabo Shark, which you'd prefer to be in the deck for your Coelacanth to summon, and then it lets you get some fresh perspective, get a fresh hand. 3 new cards is pretty massive. Not many cards in the format are spell cards that draw 3 cards. It's a very rare effect. Being able to do that in any deck, let alone one of the best decks of the format, is just fantastic. If James has a battle trick like Gores, it's possible they'll use it, but Battle Fader, I think, can wait. James is probably considering whether or not to use the Fader if they have it, or stalling to bluff Fader. I don't think James has Gores or Fader. This equip, we are seeing the same play again, so does that telegraph a Torrential? What does it telegraph? We don't know. An enemy controller here would punish this. James opting not to bring back Treeborn Frog is a really interesting decision. What does this mean? Oh, Cyber Dragon. Maybe equipping the Machina Gear frame is playing around Cyber Dragon. But either way, they're going to have to answer this Chimera Tech. And if they don't have something for it, that's bad beats. That's a 3-for-1, buddy. Yeah, that's nasty. And this is textbook reason why Cyber Dragon is the best sideboard card in the format. Hands down. You get situations like this where it can just win the game on the spot. I wonder what the sets are if they're not responding to the Chimera Tech. Deprison. They left Deprison against Frogs. I actually don't think that that's a terrible choice. I think Unifrog is going to be a problem for this. But I do think Deprison is against anything but Unifrog is not. It's not the greatest to have in here. I wonder if James has opted to bring in Light and Darkness Dragon. It is kind of a strong effect against these Gadget decks. Compulsory is a rare inclusion. You don't see that too often. If James allows us to go to damage step, he's not dead to a limiter removal. But he's probably considering the ramifications of going to 1100 life points and decided it's best to fade her here. If James has a coelacanth, the game ends. Something to note. Yep, and that's game. I believe it's game even through DD Crow. I could be wrong about this, but I'm fairly certain. We will see a Colossal double Armory Arm. That's the kill James is going to opt for. I'm trying to think if there's any card in the format, even legal, that can stop this. Unlikely. With coelacanth, I do believe you have to flood your board if you have targets in your deck. I do believe you don't get the choice to summon only 2 or 3, even if you have more than 2 or 3 in your deck. Or if you have more than 2 or 3 in your deck. This is a ruling I'm kind of curious on. I would like to learn about more. I think the play is pretty straightforward, though. Yeah, then you get back to Fishborg. That ought to do it. The way this combo works in 2010 is Armory Arm. He does have the Crow, but yeah, again, he has a second Fishborg. So, what are you going to do about that? That's game. The way this works is Armory Arm burns based off of the Colossal Fighter's attack, but it burns the opponent because you control the Armory Arm. Yeah. Looks like we're going to be going to a game 3. Game 3. Let's see. I think Light and Darkness Dragon is scary. We've seen Crow, though. And we've seen Compulsory. This is some chainable counterplay. Some stuff that can be played through Cold Wave. Not through Cold Wave, but... Whoa. Okay. MACHINEWATA. That's a really, really weird pick. I've never seen that. Strange. James is going to take some damage here. James is thinking whether or not to crash. I think James knows the last card is a gadget. He's probably just thinking about what he dies to here. I think there's merit to bringing back the Fishborg and making a synchro so Smashing Ground doesn't kill you. This could also work, yes. But I think if you bring back Fishborg, right, and you synchro with the 2 tokens and the Metabo Shark, make like an Ancient Fairy Dragon or something. That way you're clear. You're in the clear to specifically Smashing Ground. It lets you play around a little bit more. I think that's probably a fine play. Wonder what James is putting back. Probably putting back the... Wait, wasn't the Fader in play? Oh no, he discarded that Fader to summon Fishborg. Interesting. Okay. This has been a pretty interesting game. I'm kind of like 3-heading my way through interpreting it, but there's been some serious counterplay. I don't think I've ever seen MACHINEWATA played. Ever. And I don't know why you would bring it in this matchup. I guess it does prevent the Armory Arm OTK. But that's literally all it does. And it only gives you a turn, you know? And then you're still in the same position, I suppose. Yeah, now this I don't fully agree with. I think if you use the Fishborg and you make a Bryonic or make a Goyo or something, you evade the Smashing Ground. I think Smashing Ground here is your loss, your difficult loss. So it's a questionable play from James. Not entirely wrong, not necessarily a misplay, but perhaps an error. Yeah. So if this gadget attacks, then if he has a way to kill his own gadget, then he's in a spot. He's in a good spot. Not a good spot, but an alive spot, as opposed to his previous very dead spot. Does this do anything? That's the question. That's another reason I probably would have made the Ancient Fairy Dragon in defense. I don't even know if James plays Ancient Fairy Dragon, though. That could be another consideration. If you play Black Rose Dragon, maybe it's not the best play. Enemy controller wins because you can switch the red gadget to attack position. You obviously can't bring back the Treeborn because the Armory Arms occupy spell and trap zones. I wonder if there's a synchro that changes battle positions in this meta. Something to consider. James did Avarice back the Cyber Dragon, but I don't know if James has 2 Chimera Techs in his extra deck. So Cyber Dragon here is not the best. It doesn't clear this situation you have, these 2 monsters here. I'm trying to think of one way you can win. I wonder, can you tribute the Oystermeister tokens? Now that there's not an Oystermeister here in play, I'm not so certain about that. I don't think you can tribute them for a tribute summon, but maybe. Not necessarily sure. If Machina Fortress dies by battle, it can destroy the Colossal Fighter, and that's an issue. James can also just chill out. It's not a great situation. Crow Hanawata was a pretty crazy serious place. I don't think I've ever seen anyone sideboard Hanawata in this format. It might be a targeted sideboard card, because Burn is not our real deck in this format. If we're gonna be honest, it's not a real. This probably should have been included in our sideboard video, but hey, it wouldn't be very high. even considering it might steal this game, it wouldn't be very high. James considering his options as usual, taking his time. I wonder here what James' hand could be. Treeborn does not come back. I have to let him know that. Yeah, that would be cheating. And we don't want James' integrity to be ruined by cheating in a money match on camera in 4K. That would be not ideal. Dupe block here is pretty good. Prevents any sort of issues. I wonder if the Colossal goes to attack mode and attacks over the red gadget, clearing the Armory Arms. It might not be the worst play, but you are removing an out for an auto win in enemy controller. This Substitute's going to be able to thin the deck out, neutralize a lot of your draws that are not great. James considering the Swap Frog bounce effect here. This has been a really interesting game. That Hanawata really switched things up, mixed things up. Double Dupe Frog coming out. I wonder if the gadget deck has any way to attack directly. No. Yeah, that should just be game, considering no second Hanawata. I had forgotten about this effect. Mm, I wonder if we'll see a lightning vortex. Machine Fortress interesting because if you target it with Armory Arm, I believe you do get to look at your opponent's hand and discard cards. But I'm not necessarily sure. Before resolving an opponent's monster effect that targets his face-up card. Yeah, so it becomes Chain Link 2, I believe. If he gets targeted. Man, this set has been questioning my own comprehension of this format. And you love to see it. There's no other format of the game that really does it like Edison format. A lot of plays, a lot of interesting back and forth duels. But alas, game's over. So, can't attack. Dupe Frog means you can't attack. That's going to be that. Yep. And that's the game. When you have two Dupe Frogs in play, for those of you who are newer to the format, your opponent cannot declare an attack on any one of your monsters, as there's a paradox. It's called Dupe Lock by some of the more regular players of the format. However, it does not prevent you from attacking directly. If you have something like Drill Warrior, Rainbow Flower, for example, you can still attack your opponent directly. It only redirects the attacks if you're attacking, declaring an attack on a monster, basically. Not an unbeatable combo, just fairly annoying combo, especially because it means you generally have to spend a spell or a trap on a Dupe Frog, which is not great, as then usually the Dupe Frog allows a search. Usually, unless you destroy it mid-chain, forcing the Dupe Frog to miss timing. Carl was prepared for the first Armory Arm OTK, however the second one was prevalent in that match. I think this is going to be an uphill battle for Carl's deck. Hanawata is an interesting choice, an interesting tool, I might add. But if James is prepared for it, if James has got the Mind Crush or the Light and Darkness Dragons or alternate plans here, James is probably going to play more of a Mistworm strategy in the following games. Get that 8,000 points in. We could see more of that. Now, from Carl's perspective, we've seen Dimensional Prison, we've seen Compulsory Evacuation Device, we've seen DD Crow, and we've seen Hanawata, which leads me to believe Carl has cited out the Doom Calibers, but what else has Carl cited out? It's a good question. The lack of sideboard cards, or not sideboard cards, but extra deck cards is something you gotta just fill them out. I mean, there's no reason not to. You might end up, brain controlling a tuner. You never really know. Although I'm not so certain this Machina deck plays brain control. It's not a bad inclusion in any deck, as stealing a monster and you can tribute summon it for a Machina Fortress, or you can just attack for game or whatever. It's not bad. It's just not maybe as ideal as something like Smashing Ground and these types of summon a monster, search a monster strategies. James considering his options. Probably setting a Dupe Frog before passing the turn. Very unlikely we see anything other than a Dupe Frog or a Snowman Eater. I think Snowman Eater would be pretty good here. I wonder if the Machina player has been able to side in Noblemen's, or if that card is even on their radar. We do see a Dupe Frog here. James pondering after drawing for turn. This Dupe Frog is going to protect whatever James elects to summon. Not committing the Machina Fortress is a bit telling. Perhaps the Carl players becoming a little bit more concerned about being OTK'd or whatnot. James saying second here to be polite to his opponent. We all know this fish deck has an obscene amount of decisions you can make, and it does take a little bit of time to consider the correct decision without making slight errors or slight missequencings. I do wonder what's being considered here, though, in the standby phase of this turn. Is there a way that this deck can discard a Treeborn Frog in standby phase and bring it back? I'd be interested to see that. I wonder if there's any sort of spell card, quick play spell card, it'd have to be, or quick effect that discards Treeborn Frog in the standby phase that James is choosing to include here. Machina Gearframe's a good card. Not talked about as much, but it is a scary card. It applies a significant amount of pressure. It's about a 6-turn clock, 5-turn clock. And ooh, Cold Wave. This means we're probably seeing a Coelacanth. If this resolves, this turn is going to be a Coelacanth kill. Ooh. Ooh, that's a mistake. I believe that's a mistake. Compulsing your own monster there. Maybe he doesn't have outs to the Armory Arm KO. Perhaps he doesn't have the MACHINEWATA in his hand. But this ought to just be game. I believe you can put 8,000 into play with just this. Maybe you can't. Maybe James' last card needs to be a Pot of Avarice before you can put 8,000 into play. I think you can do 7,800 or 7,200. I'm not quite sure. I know James has a spreadsheet that he's shared with me. Actually, I don't think he's shared it with me. He has a spreadsheet of all the kills you can do with this deck, and it's fairly intriguing. I wonder if we should do a video on that sometime in the future. Let us know if that's something you guys would be interested in. If there's any fish players in the comments who would care to see James' spreadsheet action. It is one of the reasons you do play this Metabo Shark, Royal Swamp Eel sort of deal. It gives you high damage output. Let's see. Armory Arm plus Colossal Fighter plus whatnot. Now, if Carl has Battle Fader and MACHINEWATA and... oh yeah, this should be 8,000. This is Xaxes. There you go. GG's. This just showcases the nastiness of the fish deck. You're underprepared for this, you're going to get 8,000 on turn 2. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Leave a like, leave a comment, leave a subscribe. You know the vibe. Peace out.